Adobe should be winning. The company just posted some of the strongest revenues in its history, generating nearly $24 billion in annual sales. Its software remains the backbone of the creative industry. Millions of designers, photographers, editors, and businesses still depend on Photoshop, Premiere Pro, Illustrator, and dozens of other Adobe products every day. Yet investors are treating Adobe like a company in decline. Over the last few years, its stock has steadily lost value. The company that once traded near record highs has seen confidence evaporate, even while profits continue growing. Something clearly doesn't add up. Normally, falling companies lose customers first and revenue second. Adobe is experiencing the opposite. Revenue remains strong, but the market is becoming increasingly skeptical about its future. The reason has little to do with Adobe's past. It has everything to do with what comes next. For decades, Adobe built one of the most powerful business models in technology. Its products became industry standards. Learning Photoshop wasn't just learning software, it was learning a professional skill. Entire careers were built around Adobe's ecosystem. That dominance allowed Adobe to do something few companies ever achieve. It made itself difficult to replace. The more projects users created inside Adobe's ecosystem, the harder it became to leave. Businesses trained employees on Adobe software. Universities taught Adobe products. Agencies built workflows around Adobe tools. The company became the default choice, but dominance can create blind spots. While Adobe focused on protecting its position, the creative world was quietly changing. New users cared less about mastering complex software and more about getting results quickly. Small businesses wanted convenience. Content creators wanted speed. Casual users wanted simplicity, and competitors noticed. At first, Adobe ignored them. Most were smaller, cheaper alternatives aimed at beginners rather than professionals. They didn't seem like a serious threat to a company that practically owned the creative software industry. But over time, those alternatives kept improving. Meanwhile, Adobe was becoming increasingly dependent on a strategy that made investors nervous. Subscriptions. The model generated enormous profits. Instead of selling software once, Adobe charged customers every month. Investors loved the predictable revenue. Customers gained access to powerful tools without paying thousands of dollars up front. It looked like a perfect system, until users started trying to leave. What happened next would damage Adobe's reputation, attract government regulators, and trigger one of the biggest public relations crises in the company's history. And that was only the beginning, because while Adobe was busy defending its subscription empire, a far bigger threat was already approaching, one that would challenge the very idea of professional creative software itself: artificial intelligence. For most of its history, Adobe sold software. You bought Photoshop, you bought Illustrator, you bought Premiere Pro. The upfront cost was expensive, but once you paid, the software was yours. Then Adobe changed the rules. As cloud computing transformed the tech industry, Adobe abandoned one-time purchases and moved everything to Creative Cloud. Instead of paying once, customers would pay every month. From a business perspective, it was brilliant. Recurring subscriptions created a predictable stream of revenue. Investors loved it. Adobe loved it. Revenue became more stable than ever before. At first, customers didn't seem to mind either. A monthly fee felt far cheaper than spending thousands of dollars on software licenses. But there was a catch. The payments never stopped. What looked affordable in the short term often became far more expensive over the years. Professional users could easily spend far more than the cost of the old software packages while never actually owning anything. Still, most users accepted the trade-off. The real controversy came when they tried to cancel. Many customers discovered that leaving Adobe wasn't nearly as simple as joining. Certain subscription plans included early termination fees that surprised users who believed they were signing up for a flexible monthly service. Others complained about confusing cancellation processes and aggressive retention tactics. For years, these complaints remained largely confined to forums and social media. Then regulators stepped in. In 2024, the U.S. government filed a lawsuit accusing Adobe of hiding important subscription terms and making cancellation unnecessarily difficult. The allegation struck a nerve. This wasn't just about fees. It was about trust. Adobe had spent decades building a reputation as a company that empowered creators. Now it was being accused of trapping those same creators inside contracts they struggled to escape. The financial penalties were significant. The reputational damage was worse. Across the internet, a new narrative began to emerge. Adobe wasn't being described as an innovative software company anymore. It was being described as a company at war with its own customers. That perception created a dangerous opening for competitors. For years, Adobe's dominance had protected it from serious challengers. Most alternatives simply weren't good enough to convince professionals to switch. But now, users had a reason to look elsewhere, and for the first time in a long time. They were finding alternatives that looked surprisingly attractive. The timing couldn't have been worse, because Adobe's biggest competitor wasn't trying to beat Photoshop. It was trying to eliminate the need for Photoshop altogether. Its name was Canva. And while Adobe was fighting regulators, Canva was quietly winning millions of users. Adobe spent years believing its biggest advantage was power. Photoshop could do more than almost any competing product. Premiere Pro dominated professional video editing. Illustrator remained the industry standard for graphic design. The problem was that most people didn't need the most powerful tool. They just needed a tool that worked. That realization helped turn Canva into one of the fastest-growing software companies in the world. Launched in Australia in 2013, Canva approached design from the opposite direction. Instead of targeting professionals, it targeted everyone else: small businesses, teachers, students, content creators, people who wanted results without spending months learning complicated software. The formula was simple. Open a browser, choose a template, start creating. No steep learning curve, no expensive subscription, no professional training required. The strategy worked. Canva exploded from a startup into a platform with hundreds of millions of users. Many weren't professional designers, but that hardly mattered. They represented a massive segment of the market that Adobe had largely ignored. Even more concerning for Adobe, some professionals began adopting Canva too. Not because it was better, because it was easier, and in technology, easier often wins. Adobe knew the threat was real, but instead of rebuilding its products from the ground up, it tried something faster. It tried to buy the future. In 2022, Adobe announced plans to acquire Figma for an astonishing $20 billion. The deal shocked the tech industry. Figma wasn't just another software company. It had become one of the most popular collaborative design platforms in the world, especially among younger designers. Unlike Adobe's traditional products, Figma was built for the cloud from day one. Teams could collaborate in real time. Workflows felt faster, more modern, and more flexible. To many observers, Adobe wasn't buying Figma because it wanted to expand. It was buying Figma because it was afraid. Investors immediately questioned the price. $20 billion was an extraordinary amount of money for a company of Figma's size. Adobe's stock dropped. Then regulators began asking questions. Government agencies in both the United States and Europe worried that the acquisition would eliminate competition in the design software market. The scrutiny dragged on for months, then more than a year. Eventually, the deal collapsed. Adobe never got Figma. What it did get was a bill, because the failed acquisition came with a $1 billion breakup fee. $1 billion. Gone. No new customers. No new technology. No strategic victory. Just a $1 billion reminder that Adobe could no longer buy its way out of every problem. The failed acquisition exposed something investors had already started suspecting. Adobe wasn't leading the future of creative software. It was reacting to it. And before the company could recover from that setback, another crisis arrived. One far more dangerous than Canva. One far more dangerous than Figma. Artificial intelligence. Because while Adobe was trying to protect its position, AI was threatening to change the entire creative industry overnight. When ChatGPT exploded onto the internet in late 2022, every major technology company faced the same question. How do we adapt? For Adobe, the answer seemed obvious. If AI was going to reshape creative work, Adobe needed to be at the center of it. The company responded with Firefly, its own generative AI platform. On paper, it looked like the perfect strategy. Users could generate images from text prompts, create visual concepts in seconds, automate tedious editing tasks, speed up workflows that once required hours of manual effort. Investors loved the idea. Adobe wasn't falling behind the AI revolution. It was embracing it, but many of its users weren't celebrating. They were worried. For decades, Adobe's customers had been professional creatives, designers. Photographers, illustrators, editors, and artists who spent years developing specialized skills. Now, Adobe was introducing tools that appeared designed to automate many of those same skills. The message felt contradictory. Adobe had spent decades selling expertise. Now it was selling automation. The tension grew even stronger in 2024 when Adobe updated its terms of service. Normally, few people pay attention to legal agreements. This time they did. As users examined the updated language, concerns spread rapidly across social media and creative communities. Many interpreted the wording as giving Adobe broad rights over content processed through its cloud services. The reaction was immediate. Artists questioned whether their work was being used to train AI systems. Photographers worried about client projects. Businesses worried about confidential documents. Trust began to erode. Adobe quickly pushed back, explaining that it was not training Firefly on private customer content and clarifying how the language was intended to function. But the controversy revealed a deeper problem. Users were no longer questioning a single policy. They were questioning Adobe's intentions. For years, creatives had viewed Adobe as a partner. Now some were beginning to see it as a corporation pursuing AI at their expense. The timing couldn't have been worse. Because Firefly wasn't just another product launch, it represented a fundamental shift in Adobe's future. And that future raised an uncomfortable question. If AI can generate designs, edit images, create videos, and automate creative work, what happens to the people who built their careers using Adobe's tools? The answer would determine whether Firefly became Adobe's greatest success or its biggest mistake. From a business perspective, Adobe Firefly looked like a triumph. Since its launch, users have generated billions of AI-created images through Adobe's platform. Adoption surged. Investors saw proof that Adobe could compete in the AI era. But beneath those impressive numbers was a growing contradiction. Adobe's traditional business was built on skill. People paid premium prices because professional creative work was difficult. Learning Photoshop, Premiere Pro, or Illustrator required years of practice. That complexity created value. The harder the skill, the more valuable the software became. AI changes that equation. Instead of spending years mastering advanced tools, users can now generate content with a simple prompt. Tasks that once required professional expertise can be completed in seconds. For customers, that's convenient. For Adobe, it creates a problem. The company earns money because creative work is specialized, but Firefly is helping make that specialization less important. In effect, Adobe is teaching users how to rely less on the very skills that made Adobe essential in the first place. The risk becomes even clearer when looking at the broader AI landscape. Adobe is no longer competing only with traditional design software. It's competing with AI, and AI is becoming cheaper every year. New image generators appear constantly. Video generation tools improve at an astonishing pace. What once required expensive software increasingly requires nothing more than a browser and a prompt. That trend threatens Adobe's biggest advantage. For decades, creative professionals accepted premium subscription prices because Adobe offered capabilities that were difficult to replace. But if AI can deliver results that are good enough for most users, the value proposition starts to change. People stop asking, which software is the most powerful? They start asking, which software gets the job done fastest? History shows that convenience often beats superiority, not because the better product disappears. Because most customers don't need the best product, they need a product that's good enough. That reality is why investors remain uneasy. Adobe's AI strategy may help it survive the transition to artificial intelligence, but it may also accelerate the forces threatening its traditional business. The company faces a difficult balancing act. It must embrace AI or risk becoming irrelevant, yet the more successful its AI products become, the easier it becomes for customers to question why they need expensive creative software at all. And that leads to the most important question facing Adobe today. What exactly is Adobe becoming? Because the answer may have less to do with creators than most people realize. Adobe is not collapsing, not even close. The company still generates billions in revenue. It still controls some of the most recognizable creative software in the world. Millions of professionals continue to depend on its products every day. But Wall Street isn't worried about where Adobe is today. It's worried about where Adobe is going. The concern becomes obvious when looking at the bigger picture. Adobe's stock once traded above $680 per share. Today, it's worth a fraction of that peak. Despite strong earnings, investors continue questioning the company's long-term direction. The reason is simple. Adobe helped build an industry that AI is now transforming. For decades, creative software was valuable because creative work was difficult. Designers needed specialized tools. Editors needed advanced workflows. Businesses needed trained professionals. AI is changing all three. The barriers to creating content are falling rapidly. Images, videos, presentations, and marketing materials can increasingly be generated with minimal effort. Adobe understands this. That's why Firefly exists. That's why the company is investing heavily in AI. But many analysts believe Adobe's future may look very different from its past, instead of focusing primarily on individual creators. Adobe appears increasingly interested in serving large corporate customers, AI models, enterprise software. And business-focused services offer opportunities far beyond traditional creative subscriptions. In other words, Adobe may be evolving from a creative software company into an AI-powered enterprise company. If that strategy succeeds, Adobe could remain one of the most valuable software companies in the world. If it fails, the risks are enormous, because the transition depends on something Adobe cannot afford to lose: its users, the same creators who built careers using Photoshop, the same editors who learned Premiere Pro, the same designers who made Adobe the industry standard. Those users have tolerated rising subscription costs. They've tolerated controversial policies. They've tolerated constant changes to the platform. But every business has a limit. And if enough customers decide that cheaper AI alternatives offer similar results, Adobe's greatest strength could become its greatest weakness. The company spent decades building an ecosystem designed to keep users inside. The problem is that AI is making ecosystems less important for the first time in a generation. Creative professionals have more alternatives than ever before. Some are cheaper, some are faster, some barely existed a few years ago. Adobe still has time. Its products remain powerful. Its brand remains respected. Its business remains profitable. But dominance and permanence are not the same thing. History is full of technology giants that believed their position was untouchable. Most of them learned the same lesson. The moment you become the standard, the world starts looking for a replacement. And today, that's the question hanging over Adobe. Not whether it can survive, not whether it can make money, but whether the company that defined the creative industry can successfully reinvent itself before the industry moves on without it.